Now, from today's lecture we shall be starting some discussions on security issues in computer networks. Now, actually we shall be talking about a few things. First we shall look at some of the security infrastructures that we require, then we shall look at some of the low level techniques and technologies that we need to know about, then we shall look at some of the typical applications that have been devised to work on the internet to make transactions safe and secure. The first lecture of this series is titled Intranet, Extranet Firewall. So, we shall be looking into these three different kinds of things in some detail today. To start with, let us first try to understand what is the meaning of the terms intranet and extranet and how do they differ. Let us start with the definition of intranet as many people accept. Now, intranet, as per its definition, it says it is a private computer network. And so, this is important, that an internet is a private computer network, which means it is owned by a particular company or an organization. This is important here. So, internet is the private computer network that uses internet protocols, network connectivity and possibly the public telecommunication system, because if the organization is large, then possibly for communication they are also using the telephone lines to securely share part of an organization's information or operations with its employees. This is the definition. What it actually means? It means, suppose we have a company, we have an organization, we have a number of employees. Employees are of several different types. There can be managers, there can be supervisors, there can be the actual clerks and the other engineers. What we are saying is that the company's information system will be maintaining locally in some server inside the company, and all the employees will have access to the information system over the network. If you are using internet technology, or if these applications are based on internet protocols, then possibly you can use the simple browser on your machine to have access to whatever information you want. Secondly, there can be other security issues built into the system, so that I am a manager, I should be able to see everything I want. If you are an engineer, you should only be allowed to see or view or modify the segment of information that you are allowed to do, you are allowed to access. So, intranet means this: you use internet technologies, TCP/IP, develop application using the tools and technologies which people have been using over the internet. Advantage is that you can use the standard user interfaces or applications like the browser to access the system, and this is called intranet because this is only internal to your company. The outside users are not allowed to access or have access to this kind of a service. Typically this is behind a firewall, so that outsiders cannot access. So, as I said, it uses the same concept and technologies of the internet. This also is based on the client server technology. They are running on the TCP/IP protocol suite, and some of the very commonly used applications are, as I said, TCP, FTP and SMTP. Okay. So, these are the very typical applications which are there, and as I said, users typically use the browsers at their front end only. They do not need any other application programs to be loaded on their machines. This makes using the system platform independent. There is no need to install any special software. Advantages are obvious. Such a system will help employees to quickly locate and access information and the applications which are relevant to their usages. Okay. Depending on the segment of the employee, the information you are able to view, the kind of applications you are able to run, that will be different. And since interface is based on browsers, this will allow you so called access from anywhere. Sitting anywhere you can have access to this. Such intranets can serve as a powerful tool for communication. Both vertically and horizontally means you can have a means for communicating and you can say cooperating with your co-workers at the same level in the hierarchy, or there can be some kind of a communication mechanism between your superiors and yourself. Your superiors can give you a directive. So, this same infrastructure can be used to provide all this kind of communication. Suppose you are working in a group, in a team towards development of a certain product. So, all the workers in the group can share information, can discuss, can get to know the details of what the other members of the team is working on, if they have a suitable such intranet working and in place. Okay. So, this also permits information to be published so that other employees can view them. See, extranet is the other terminology which people use. Now, conceptually extranet and intranet are similar. There is one major difference. Extranet is also a private network that also uses internet protocols, network connectivity, public communication system, everything. But the difference is that this extranet is not only limited to the organization's employees. Extranet can be accessed by some outside agencies also, like suppliers who supply some equipments or goods to your company, partners, there can be business partners, customers, you may like to provide some service to the customers, or some other business houses. So, basically extranet says that, well, I have intranet all right, this is something which helps me solve my internal organizational problem and the way we communicate. Now, suppose we are a service provider company, we would like a very, you can say, flexible link with our customers, so that the customers can continuously get updates on what is happening. If they face any problem, they can send their request to us. Some persons from our organization can be responding back with the solutions to their queries and so on. So, this is like having an intranet with some designated outside users also being allowed to use or access. Obviously, security will be an issue here, because how do I know that other than the authorized customer, some other persons are also trying to enter our system. So, there should be good authentication and you can say encryption decryption mechanism in place to use such a system. So, essentially an extranet, you can say this is like a company's intranet which you have extended to some users outside the company, not to everybody, but to some select users. So, it is basically a private internet over the public internet. So, you can identify that which parts you want to make private, where only the registered users can navigate. You think of some sites which are very popular nowadays, and there are many websites who offer some kind of online courses. They provide you online lecture notes, materials, they conduct online examinations, but only persons who have registered for that course will be allowed to view or access those information. So, this is also an example of an extranet. As I said, for an extranet, security and privacy is a very important issue and it plays a very big role. You need to very carefully manage your firewall servers, so that unauthorized users should not be able to enter your system. Some very powerful and safe authentication mechanism is required, so that you can authenticate or verify who is trying to use your system. So, you can use something called digital certificates, which are pretty well known over the internet for this purpose. some confidential information you may want to send over the network, you need to encrypt such messages, and there is some technology which is already there like virtual private networks or VPNs, where basically you are defining some kind of a private network on a public network, and when you have a VPN, this encryption decryption mechanisms are automatically done. So, any communication over the VPN will be encrypted. So, even if a third party tries to listen what is going on, that fellow will not be able to understand anything, because all communication will be hidden or will be encrypted in a form that cannot be easily understandable by a third party. So, advantages, of course, it can improve organization's productivity, because if you can also include the customers and the other relevant parties to share your information. The main point is that here you are allowing information to be viewed at times which are convenient for the external users. Like otherwise what would have do? Otherwise one of your engineers would be visiting the customer sites, or you may ask the customer to come to your company and have a meeting with the persons out there, so that we can basically coordinate the activities in that way. But here the customers know that I have a mechanism of getting some information whenever I want. So, I can do my homework well, so that before I actually have a meeting, I know exactly what we are expected to talk about. That is one thing, and of course, it can also help in cutting down the number of times and the duration of the meetings. And since the information will typically be updated instantly and continuously, so authorized users will always come to know about these. This obviously will improve relationship with the customers, because the customer can now feel that there is much greater transparency in the operation of the business house. They can know exactly what is going on. I can send my request, I get back my response from there immediately. So, these are something which improves in, you can say, development of a good and long term relationship between the business house and the customers. Okay. Now, let us come to the issue of firewall. Firewall again is a generic term. Both in intranet and extranet we require firewalls. Firewall essentially is a mechanism using which we can filter out unwanted access attempts to our servers and our networks. We want to protect our network from external intruders. Firewall aims to do exactly that. So, let us see what are the objectives of a firewall and how do we do it. Firewalls we use to primarily locate, to protect our internal network, to protect the local systems which are there as part of our own network. Protect against several network based security threats. There are so many published kinds of security breaches and threats which are possible today. A firewall tries to protect our network against these. It can also provide internal users to have a secure and controlled access to the internet, and it can also provide restricted and controlled access from the internet to the local servers. See, everything inside your internal network should not be hidden from the outside world. There are certain things or certain servers you do want that outsiders should be able to have access to. Like you can think of your web server, your mail server, where someone else from outside wants to send a mail. So, the packet has to reach your mail server. So, these are two examples I have cited. These are some servers which need to be directly accessible from the outside world. So, you need to have some kind of restricted access to this kind of servers for meaningful operation of the systems. Some of the firewall characteristics in terms of the design goals is that, see, the first point is very important, that all traffic flowing from inside to outside, of course it is more general, also from outside to inside, must pass through the firewall. Because if you say that some of the data packets will flow through the firewall and some will not, then the packets which are not forcing to be flowed through the firewall, they may be carrying with them some malicious content or some threat. So, in order to protect best from external threats, you must ensure that everything flows through your firewall. Okay. So, you can define some so called local security policy or rules, using which you can specify that what do you mean by authorized traffic. Only such authorized traffic will be allowed to pass. And of course, the firewall system itself should be very carefully designed, because you should not have a situation where someone can easily break into the firewall and start tampering with it. So, the firewall system itself, it is also nothing but a computer. Okay. So, that should be a very special kind of a computer which is not very easy to break into, right. So, we will see there is a concept of a trusted system, secure operating system, all these things you can use to make a firewall more robust. Broadly speaking, there are three types of firewalls we encounter. Firewalls based on packet filtering mechanism, based on application level gateways, and based on circuit level gateways. Let us try to see what these are. First, let us look at the simplest of the lot, the packet filtering firewall. Now, you see, in many such filtering environments, our main objective will be to filter some packets, and the first place that we look at to take decisions regarding filterings are the packet headers themselves. Like I am giving an example. Suppose I want to enforce a rule that no one should be able to do a telnet on my machine whose IP address is this XYZ. So, I can specify a rule that all packets whose destination address is XYZ and whose port number is 23 should be blocked. Okay. So, in this way, rules based on your IP addresses, based on port numbers can be specified, and rules can be two types, either access rules or deny rules. You can say that this combination you always block, or this combination you always allow. So, there are two kinds of rules you can define. So, a packet filtering firewall tries to do exactly this, and the architecture typically looks like this. Here we are basically using a conventional router to carry out the packet filtering operation. We do not have any explicit or separate equipment which we are using as a firewall. Normally the routers which we use, there actually we can have a configuration mechanism where you can specify that what are the kind of packets you can drop, what are the kind of packets you can allow. So, just by manipulating that table itself, we can make a router work as a packet filtering firewall. So, on one side we have our internal private network to which this router is a part, and the internet connection is made through the router on the other side. So, we can just put in some rules in this router which will be able to filter some of the packets. Now, this method is not very secure in the sense that some kind of attacks which are well documented that are possible to be mounted on this kind of a system, like IP address spoofing. Someone can change the IP address. So, all rules based on IP addresses will fail. Source routing attacks, these are also some attacks which can be made to this system, and some there is another attack called a tiny fragment attack, which is also possible to mount on this kind of a system. So, I am not going into the detail of these attacks, but the idea is that there are attacks which can be mounted on these systems and which can be mounted rather easily. They are pretty well documented, and there are websites which clearly explain how such attacks can be mounted on a network. So, as I said, in this method we are applying a set of rules to each incoming packet which enters the router, and depending on the rule we either forward it or discard it. As I said, these rules are typically based on IP addresses and port numbers. In general, they can also be based on some other field of the IP headers. Okay? And in general, such a filter can filter packets going in both directions, from internal to the outside or the reverse. And the packet filters capability is defined by this set of rules or the list of rules. These are typically stored in a table, and as I said, depending on the combination you are giving, you can specify the rule to discard a packet or forward a packet. Okay? These are the two possibilities. The advantages of this kind of firewall is that it is very simple. You need not invest separately in any equipments. Transparency to the users need not know about the presence of the firewall. Okay? And this is also typically very high speed. Disadvantage is that for a very general situation, it may be difficult to set up the packet filtering rules, because in general in an organization you can have a large number of combinations of IP addresses, port numbers related to what they are allowed to do, what they are not allowed to do. So, actually this can boil down to a very large number of rules which you need to put up in the router table, and larger the table, more time it will take to search it and decide whether to forward or block a packet, right. And the second thing is that lack of authentication. We are not using any cryptographic technique here anywhere, so that here attacks like IP spoofing can be carried out, where someone can change the IP address of a network of the machine and can gain some, you can say, some unwanted advantage or authorization which otherwise that person is not allowed to have. Okay? Fine. Now, the second kind of firewall, this is called an application level gateway. This is more commonly called a proxy server. But typically this application level gateway is not a dedicated box like a router. This is typically a computer. This application level gateway or the proxy server sits between your internal network and your outside internet. Okay. Now, the idea is this: a proxy server is service specific. Let me tell you, in our network, in our institute network, we use proxy servers, and whenever we access the internet in the browser, there is a mechanism for setting which proxy server we want to use, and over which port number. So, the IP address of the proxy server and the port number on which the proxy server is receiving the requests must be set explicitly by the user in the browser, which means that the presence of this kind of application level gateway is not transparent to the users. Users know that there is a proxy server existing. So, once I set this proxy server address, whatever request I make, all my requests will flow through the proxy server, and in the proxy server there can be several set of rules I can specify. I can say that these are the sites I should not be allowed to access, these are the contents. If the contents of the request or the URL contains some specific strings, I should not be allowed to pass those requests, or means I can also specify some very generic rules, like I would not like anyone to send a request to download a video, right, MPEG or AVI file I will not allow. In terms of the file extension I can specify. These are some examples with respect to web HTTP. Similarly, I can have some rules set up with respect to email. For every email which is receiving or going out, I can do a virus checking. I can filter emails based on contents. Some objectionable contents if I find, I will drop that email with a message to the sender. So, these are very service specific filtering rules we can have here. So, this kind of application level gateway, as is shown here, there can be several services you can think of, okay? And these rules or the techniques used for filtering will be very much service specific. This basically acts as a relay of application level traffic and it is service specific. Okay. So, as I said, this is more commonly known as a proxy server. Essentially, this is a relay of application level traffic. Advantages is that this can provide you higher security and flexibility than packet filters with respect to the way you can specify the filtering rules. Now, here since you are specifying the rules which are application specific, the rules can be much more meaningful, just not always only based on the IP addresses and port numbers, okay. Also based on the contents of the packets I can have some rules. And here, depending on the kind of applications you want to filter, you need to scrutinize only those applications, and also it is easy to maintain a log. Like now you know that which person in your organization is doing what kind of activity, because all his activities are flowing through the proxy server and the proxy server is maintaining that information in a log file. So, this also sometimes becomes helpful if you want to trace back from some event to, you can say, the origin of the event, why it occurred. So, the log helps in doing that. Disadvantage is that you need to make additional processing on each connection due to the presence of the proxy servers. And secondly, since proxy servers are computers, they are typically much slower as compared to routers, where there is a lot of acceleration which is done based on hardware devices. Okay. So, these are some of the disadvantages. The third type is something called a circuit level gateway. This is something like, this is more like a tunneling, like from the inside I have a host out here, I want to access some service in some outside host, or the reverse, the host from outside wants to access some service inside. So, I establish some kind of a tunneling connection, and after I establish a connection, what happens is that whatever I send, they will be encapsulated and sent over the tunnel to the other side. So, the contents will not be decoded. Okay. So, this is called circuit level gateway, as if I have established a circuit, and once I have established the circuit, I can send whatever, that will be straight away flown to the other side over the circuit. Let me give an example where this kind of tunneling is used. You see, normally inside a LAN or inside a network, we use the MAC addresses, Ethernet addresses and the IP addresses. There are specific technologies there. So, there we talk about IP packets, we talk about TCP and UDP packets and so on. But suppose I have a leased line link from my organization to the office of a service provider, that link may be some other link which uses some other protocol, like say the X.25, that is a wide area network protocol which does not understand TCP or IP. So, now what I will have to do, I will have to take the IP packet, I will have to hide that IP packet inside that X.25 header, and send the whole thing as an x.25 packet through tunneling. So my whole packet reaches the other side. After taking out the x.25 header, I get back the original IP packet. So now in the other network, I can now again process that IP packet to decide where next to forward it. This is an example of a tunneling, and the circuit level gateway tries to do exactly that. It tries to send some information directly over an already pre-established connection without processing any content, right. So these are typically specialized, as I told you, of the application. This does not usually permit end-to-end TCP connections, only IP packets can be forwarded. Rather, the gateway will set up two separate TCP connection, say gateway to the internal node, gateway to the gateway to the external node. There will be two separate TCP connections maintained, and the gateway will be carrying out some translation of this TCP connection within. Okay. So here the security or the filtering rules will specify that what connections we will allow and what we will not allow, right. Now the one example in the security related situation where this kind of filter is used, it is the SOX package, which many of us use for secure transmission. So this is just an example. Okay. Now we come to something called a Bastion host. Bastion host, this term comes in connection with some implementation issues of a firewall. Now we are talking about how we can implement a firewall in a practical situation. Bastion host, the name comes from the fact that it is a host which is unbreakable. Now unbreakable is a hypothetical concept. However careful you may be in designing or securing your system, some hacker or intruder somewhere can always find a means to break into it. Okay. So it is only a short term solution. You continuously need to keep upgrading the security features of a system to keep it protected against the attacks which are already published and which are new attacks will be coming every day. Okay. So you will have to also be alert to keep your system secure and intact. So Bastion host is essentially a separate or special system which is identified by the firewall administrator as a critical point with respect to the network security. Now here we are saying that this is one computer in our network which is critical. Let us make it as safe and secure as we can. So the security of our whole system or whole firewall will depend on the security of this particular system. So let us be very careful in the way we design this system. Okay. This is what Bastion host is. Now typically Bastion host executes a secure version of operating system. Many vendors today, they have a secure version of its operating system which is usually a stripped down version, a smaller version, but it is quite safe, and also these OSs are very expensive. This consists only of the services which the administrator feels are essential, and for any kind of access some authentication mechanism is followed before users are allowed access. Now we shall be looking at firewall configurations which uses or utilizes such Bastion hosts in the implementation. Now there can be simple configuration of a single system, as we shall see earlier, just using a single router. More complex firewall configuration they use or utilizes multiple systems, and we shall be seeing such complex configurations. There are three configurations which you typically find in use: single homed, dual homed and screened subnet. These are the three different alternatives for firewall implementation or configuration, whatever you call. Let us start with single homed host. This is the diagram. On one side we have the internet, this is the outside world, and whatever else you are seeing, this is our internal network. Now you can see we have a router which separates the internal network from the internet. Now our internal network is represented by this bus, okay. So this bus is our internal network. The Bastion host is sitting here, is connected to the internal network. There are some information servers, as I said, like the web server or the mail server, and our internal computers or private network hosts. Now you look at these yellow arrows. The way the router and the Bastion host has been configured, the router will only allow traffic to flow if it is either made destined to the Bastion host or it is coming from the Bastion host, okay. Because we know Bastion host is a safe and secure system, so let all communication with the outside world go through the Bastion host. The packet filtering router will block all other packets. So any packet which is directed to an internal host will be blocked. Similarly, the Bastion host can send and receive information from these information servers. So if the outside world, some node out there, wants to access a web page, first the request will come to the Bastion host, the Bastion host will forward it to the information server, then again the reverse path will be followed. So similar thing will happen if an outside node wants to send some data to the internal host or vice versa. These requests have to be going through the Bastion host. There is no direct path which will be allowed, right. So you can understand, in order to compromise this system, you will either have to compromise or break into the Bastion host, or it may be an easier proposition that you can break this router. Now if you can hack the router, you can easily change the packet filtering rules, and once you change the packet filtering rules, so the yellow arrows that are shown, they are no longer valid. Now an outside internet host can directly start communicating with the internal network. So in a sense, this configuration is not really very secure, because although we have used a Bastion host, but the router becomes the vulnerable point in the network, okay. Now although someone has not directly demonstrated it, it is felt that the routers which are commercially available by renowned vendors like Cisco, they have some deliberate vulnerabilities in them, but still if you use them in your network, then actually you are compromising on the security of your network, right. So unless you have some other mechanism to safeguard the security, that means the router, if it is the single point vulnerable, you can say, point in the network, then you are really in an uncomfortable situation, okay. You should try to have something better than that. So as you had seen that in this method, the firewall consists of a router and a Bastion host. So the router, as I said, it will only allow packets to and from the Bastion host to flow. The Bastion host can perform authentication, it can also perform the proxy functions. This method has greater security than the single router configuration, because here you can also have application level filtering or proxy filtering in the Bastion host, okay. And well, here although I have said that intruder can break the single system like the router, but in general you can make configuration to the other servers and systems in such a way that they will also only accept requests from the Bastion host. So in general, the intruder needs to break the Bastion host also, if the internal administrator is very careful, so then each individual system also can be provided with some internal or personal firewall, so that only packets from the Bastion host will be accepted. So then even if an intruder breaks into the firewall, still that fellow will not be able to do much. Now let us come to the second configuration. Here we are talking about a dual homed host. See, dual home host means a host or a computer with two network connections, two network ports. So now we are making the Bastion host as dual homed. There will be two network cards, it can be connected to two different networks. So actually what we are doing here is that we are physically separating the network. There are two networks now, okay. You see the Bastion host, one network is connected to one to which only the information server and the router is connected, and it is connected to the other where the internal private hosts are connected. So here even if the intruder breaks into the packet filter router, there is no direct path to access the internal computers. They will have to go through the Bastion host. So essentially here we are forcing the intruder to also break the Bastion host in order to break into our network. Just by breaking the router will not allow the person to have access to our internal hosts, right. So in that sense, dual home host is an improvement of the previous approach. So here we have two separate networks with a Bastion host protecting the access. Now you see here this network to which the Bastion host, information servers and the router are connected. This is a special network. In this network some of our public servers are present, like your web server, mail server, as I said. Now there is a special name of this part of the network. This is called a Demilitarized Zone or DMZ zone. So DMZ zone is also a secure zone, but it contains some information server which can be accessed from outside. So in this DMZ zone, as you can see, security is provided by having all accesses taking place through the Bastion host. Okay, fine. So here the packet filtering router, you cannot completely compromise the system by compromising that. So now all traffic between internal and outside network has to flow through the Bastion host. This is one very important characteristic out here. Now let us go one step further. Let us have a system comprising of two separate routers, because cutting a network, putting in two network cards, this is of course a solution. A better solution may be, let us have two different routers with two different kinds of policies. The internal router is protecting our private network, and the external router is used as an interface to the outside world, and the Bastion host and information server are in the middle network. So as you can see, the Bastion host, as usual, it holds the responsibility of communicating with the outside world, with the private network and with the information server, and the inside router can be configured to accept packets only from the Bastion host. So it is almost impossible for an external intruder to break into the internal router, because the external intruder can never reach the internal router directly. Okay. So even if the external router is compromised, the internal router cannot be reached, because internal router will be ignoring all packets which are coming from any other place other than the Bastion host. Fine. So this is typically the most comprehensive version, where this firewall system comprises of a pair of routers and a Bastion host. This is called the screened subnet kind of a firewall. Now this is the most secure configuration of the 3, there are 2 packet filtering routers which are used, and it creates an isolated subnetwork. Now, in this context, let me also talk about a few things. See, we have talked about a firewall that protects our network from the outside world, but as a user, as a network administrator, you have to look beyond this basic capability. See, having a firewall installed, having a proxy server as part of the firewall, you get a few benefits, all right. You get a mechanism to filter some traffic, you get a mechanism for the proxy function, some kind of content based filtering you can have. You can have an online virus checking of the mails, which is becoming so important nowadays, because many of the mail attachments reach your machine with viruses. If you can check and remove those attachments automatically at the proxy server, it will be very good. So, this provides some kind of a boundary protection to our network. Our network, it is connected to the outside network, we are putting as if a boundary wall across our network. But what if there is an intruder sitting inside? What do you do about it? In a big organization, this is always possible and very much possible. So, we are protecting, we are closing all the windows and doors, but you do not know whether a thief is sitting inside our organization, right. So, for this again there are several different technologies and techniques which have been put to use. Now, one very important technique which is being used, it is still a topic of research, it is called an intrusion detection system. An intrusion detection system can be installed on all the main servers and some special computer systems on the network, which actually continuously monitors the network traffic and primarily looks for some kind of statistical anomaly. For example, say there is a computer system which is normally expected to receive packets at a certain rate throughout the day, but suddenly someone finds that the rate of packets to that server has gone up abnormally 10 times. So, this is possibly an attempt to break into that server. Maybe some dummy packets are automatically generated by some node and is being sent to that particular server with an attempt to break into it. So, this is just a simple example. There are many such attacks which are possible, and each of these attacks, they carry some kind of a statistical signature along with them. So, if you can identify the signatures and if you can basically carry out some filtering based on the signatures, so you can raise an alarm every time you feel that something wrong is probably going on. So, an IDS or an intrusion detection system tries to do exactly that. Now, in addition to that, you can have installed some personal firewalls on your desktops. This is also very essential in modern day computing, because you need to protect intruders from breaking into your system also. Most of our personal computers and systems are insecure in the sense that it is rather easy for a well trained intruder to break into the system and gain access to very important information. So, if we can have a simple desktop level firewall, it can protect us from even the internal intruders of the network. Moreover, you know that there are many applications we shall basically be talking about this later again. There are many internet applications through which we carry out some transactions. Many of them are financial transactions also. There we are asked to key in some very confidential information like our bank account password, the account number, the credit card number, and so on. There is a process called phishing, which people are very worried about today, where some intruder somewhere can get hold of my information without me knowing it. So, this kind of things can also be stopped by a well designed personal firewall, which can also include an anti-spyware system. Spyware is also a big problem nowadays. It can make our system vulnerable to external attacks. Okay. So, just continuing, in this third alternative, we basically have three levels of defense to thwart intruders. There are two routers, there is one outside router, there is an inside router, and thirdly there is the Bastion host. So, the outside router makes the internal network invisible to the internet. Similarly, the inside router makes the internet invisible to the inside network. So, everything has to go through the Bastion host. So, let us again come back to the intranet and extranet problem, and let us very briefly look at some of the design issues here in intranet and extranet. Some of this we shall be talking about in some detail in our next lectures, but let us first look at some of the basic issues that you need to address when you are designing an intranet or an extranet. Now, for an intranet, as I said, since we are trying to maintain an information system for the organization where different cross sections of the employee may have access to different cross section of the information. So, some analysis of the organization flow and the different categories or cross section of the employees, their access privileges should be identified. This is very important because if this process is not done properly, then some employee may be having some privileges or access to some information which they should not have. So, here you should have a very flexible authentication mechanism. So, after authentication, the system should be able to decide that what are the kind of information this particular employee is allowed or supposed to have access to. Okay. Similarly, for extranet, some of the issues are similar, but some of the issues are even more of concern, like security. Now, somebody from outside my network is trying to visit my website, get some information, interact with us, and so on. So, here some much more stronger authentication mechanism should be there to validate whether that external user is an authorized user of our extranet or not. Okay. So, there are many such systems in place. Unfortunately, many of the systems which people use, they lack the necessary security level. So, they have some vulnerabilities. So, in general, we can use any combination of firewalls, some special authentication mechanisms, maybe based on some kind of smart cards or some kind of biometric authentication, virtual private network. So, all these things, combination of all these technology should be used to make extranet a safer place to carry out transaction, discussions, meetings, and so on. So, with this we come to the end of this lecture, where we have basically talked about some intranet and extranet design issues, and we had looked at the several different alternatives to firewall designs. So, we shall now look at the solutions to the questions from last lecture. What is the basic concept behind input stream and output stream in Java? They are basically abstract classes which are present in the Java supported libraries. The input stream class can be used to abstract any kind of input, and output stream for any kind of output. How can you read one line of text at a time from a file called data.in? Well, first you can use the file input stream to create a new instance of an object. Then you can call data input stream to create an object INP, using which you can call the readline method. This is how we use. What are the functions of the server socket and the accept methods? The server socket method is used to initialize the server socket, while the accept method is used to make the server wait for the client connection. So, the server will be blocking itself when it is executing accept and will be waking up as soon as a client connection request comes. When you do prefer to have a concurrent server? Concurrent servers are preferred in cases where multiple simultaneous client requests are likely and also the service time is long. What are the functions of the datagram packet and the datagram socket classes? This, as I said, the datagram packet class acts as a data container. The packet data container, it represents the packet, whereas the datagram socket class defines the socket for sending and receiving datagrams. This is the difference. So, now some questions from today's lecture. What is the main difference between an intranet and an extranet? How does a packet filtering router typically filters packets? How does an application level gateway carry out the filtering process? Which would be more suitable for email filtering, packet level filter or application level gateway? What is a Bastion host? In the dual home host firewall, how many security points must be broken or breached by an intruder before he can get into the internal network? Seventh one, the same problem, but for the screened subnet firewall. So, in the next lecture we shall be starting our discussion on some basic cryptographic techniques which can be used for network security. Till then, goodbye. In this lecture we shall be continuing with our discussion on network security. If you recall, in our earlier lecture we had talked about intranets, extranets and firewalls. Now today in this lecture, first we shall talk about some of the general network security threats that we typically encounter, followed by some discussion on some basic cryptographic techniques. So let us start by some of the basic concepts in network security. We start with the different kind of generic security attacks that we typically encounter in a network or in a computer system.